Well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone who's here. I'm Dianna Anderson. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cylient. At Cylient, our sole focus is really instilling in-the-moment coaching and feedback as a way of life. And one of the core principles of in-the-moment feedback and coaching is learning with and from each other, which is why we like to occasionally hold these dialogues, which we feel are opportunities for us to learn with the community of people. So if you're new to a dialogue, let me invite you, first of all, to stay on camera if you possibly can, so that you can be part of the conversation. And during the conversation, I'm going to be both asking our guest, J.R. Burch, as well as you, our audience, some questions. And so I'd like you to be sharing your thoughts and ideas in the chat. And we have Beth LaValle from our Cylient team with us here today. Beth, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone.
She's going to be watching the chat, and JR and I are going to stop from time to time and take a look at what you shared, and kind of integrate your thoughts, ideas, and questions into our conversation. So in this way, we're going to be tapping into everyone's wisdom. So I hope you play along. I think it really makes things a lot more fun. So today we're talking about learning as a journey and how to really use online collaborative learning as a tool for shifting mindsets. And I'm so thrilled to have J.R. Burch from Intrepid Learning with us. He's the senior learning partner there. And we came to know as J.R. Here at Cylient because he has guided our learning journey of turning our instructor-led work into a digital expression. And I have to say it was really an amazing experience for me to kind of enter into this creative space that JR is just so accomplished at. And he has challenged us to think about things differently, shown us different possibilities. He's a great creative thinker in the online collaborative space and has a tremendous passion for just pushing the edge on what's possible with learning. So I'm thrilled to be in conversation with him today. Thank you, JR, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for that wonderful intro too. You have to write that down and keep it.
Yeah, it's yours. You can use it. Put my name on it. You are just a joy and a gem. And so we're all in for an excellent learning experience today. So I want to get started with the whole dialogue thing, which is I'm going to ask the audience to talk about this idea of mindsets. I mean, right now we hear a lot about changing mindsets, changing skill sets, and I'm curious, what are your thoughts on why is it so important right now for us to be changing mindsets? And so I'm going to let the audience get into that. But JR, what I think you and I need to do to get our dialogue going is to talk a little bit about what is actually the difference, or how do you see the difference between a mindset and a skill set?
Yeah, so let's start with skill set. So skill set would be something that involves you learning specific knowledge or techniques about something that allow you to perform a certain task, right? So the goal is for you to be able to practice in repetition and then be proficient in this skill. Whereas a mindset is more of it's more cultivating attitudes, beliefs, the habits that shape the way you approach challenges or the way you interact with others or the way you make decisions. So the goal here is to develop this a way of thinking that enables you to respond in a wide range of situations, and as well as be able to grow and adapt with it over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the ways that I kind of think about it, and in our world of coaching-based leadership is, we think about the mindset of changing what you think it means to be a good and effective leader as the mindset change that actually inspires people to learn new skills. One of the things that we find is that if someone doesn't change their mindset to learn a new skill, to actually understand the value of doing something differently, that it often limits their ability to learn that new skill. So in a specific example, it might be, if someone still thinks it's their job as a leader to tell people what to do, but they're learning coaching skills, they might just kind of pick up on using questions to try to direct others. Versus if they have changed their mindset and see the value of really developing other people and see that as their job, then they get more excited about learning how to use questions and curiosity in new ways. And so I think they interplay together with each other in a significant way. So yeah, so let's just, I'd love to just check in with our audience and kind of get some participation from them in terms of why changing mindsets is so important. Beth, is there anyone that you would point towards that maybe you'd like to have share another idea? I'm just sort of looking quickly through the chat here. Anything about why changing mindsets right now is just so important to us all?
Well, I think the world is changing all around us, and it's an ever faster pace of change. And those of us who don't change our mindsets and change our perspectives will be left behind pretty quickly.
Yeah, I would agree.
It reminds me of, I had a boss several years ago, but one of the things he told me that's always stuck with me is that, and I paraphrase it, and I never get it exactly right, but it's basically is the world will never change as slow as it does today. So meaning, you know, every day in the future, things are going to change more rapidly, and there's going, you know, it's just constantly evolving. So having that mindset ability to be able to shift, to change, to adapt is just like you said, it's more important than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the pace of change, again, I think as we're all pointing towards, is really, really increasing. And I would say, you know, if you look at the behaviors that are making the most significant difference in the world right now, you know, people being able to adapt to, you know, supply chains that are collapsing and they have to think about them in new ways, or even really, you know, all of our DE&I efforts and having people really rethink how they interact with each other and what we value. These are huge behavior changes that we need to have happen at scale. And we need a big mindset change at scale to be able to really be successful. So I think that's why this conversation is so, so important right now. So thinking about that, JR, what are your thoughts on how, you know, as we're using learning, basically in collaborative online learning for our conversation today, how is expanding a mindset different than training a skill set? Like when you are thinking about supporting somebody in those efforts, what are some of the things that come to mind to you as being important to keep in mind?
To me, the mindset change takes more time, and it requires more connections to shift a mindset. So I mean, you're essentially uprooting old beliefs that people have, and convincing them that there's a new, different, perhaps better way of doing things. There's also an emotional component to it. People can adopt and adapt to change when they understand the benefit for them. So in learning, we always have the WIFM, the what's in it for me, and people need to know what's in it for me. That how's it going to help benefit me, on my side of things. And I think there's a difference in the way you approach it through learning. So skill sets they're established through practice. You repeat the task in different ways, whereas mindsets are established through things like reflections, self-awareness, coaching, and as well as just facing different challenges, facing and overcoming challenges in just real world situations and real life experiences.
Yeah, which is just such a richer form of learning, like how do we create that online? So I guess I would take that both out to the audience and to you, JR. I mean, how have you seen experiences created through online collaborative learning that allow us to feel that kind of, challenge or take something out into the real world? Or like, what are some of the unique things about the online learning experience that you think really touch on that, those kinds of things that change mindsets? I'd love to just maybe, if you have some specific examples of things you've seen people do that have worked in that area, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah. So there's like in the Intrepid world, we have a few different ways that we accomplish it. So one of the things when I talk about reflections are a big activity throughout a lot of our clients. Think about this new skill that we're learning, and without applying it to like something that you're going to do in the future, just think back to the last thing that you did, the last thing you developed, the last person you coached, and now think about it through the lens of this new skill. How did you accomplish that in the past, and then what would you do different? So being able to recognize like these things that you've already done that are fresh in your mind, but being able to look at it through a different lens, those reflection activities work really well. They're really powerful. We also have things like just discussions. Having discussions allow a lot broader audience to come in. So whereas in the past with learning, we present you with the content, and this is what you need to learn, but you don't get to put any of your own thought, your knowledge, your experience in it. So when you create these environments where people can share, they can share experiences, they can share thoughts, they can share ideas. A lot of the times what you'll end up with is your learners may actually connect with someone on a different level than even what your content did. They may have an experience that they share that's more relevant or closer to something that I have gone through, so I can connect with it more. So when you open up this kind of this community level of collaboration and sharing thoughts and ideas, it really just kind of expands on what's possible. I'll stop there.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Yeah, we have seen that as well. I think one of the things, in our learning, one of my favorite kind of mind expanding activities was just the simple thing of having people who are in disparate areas of an organization actually all climb onto one cohort and be learning together. And the amount of exchange that was happening about how they had actually understood each other's worlds, what the challenges that each other were having, but as they were sharing real life things, it started to expand their worldview, even just about the space that they were working in and what other people were challenges that other people were having. So let's take a moment. We've got a really active chat here. And so I'd love to take a look at some of the things that are in here. People are, you take a look too, and let me know if there's anything that you'd like to elaborate on or ask anybody about. I'm just taking a quick look through. I love this, changing the mindset to focus on positives, bring people together and promote small victories as tasks progress. I think that's a wonderful thing to keep in mind. I think that the more positive the experience people have with changing the mindset, the more open they are to the possibility of that experience. One of the things I would comment on, and one of the things I've noticed, is that this is actually super risky business, right? Like, changing your mindset that results in behavior change is probably one of the riskiest things we can do as human beings, because it's public. You can't take it back. And so things that we can do online to make things safer for people to embrace change would be important. What are your thoughts on that, J.R.? I mean, how do you kind of promote safety as part of the learning process when we're working with mindset change?
Yeah, safety is a big one. People, they're hesitant to adopt change if they feel like failure is a part of it, especially in the business world. If you feel like nobody wants to fail, but failure is a powerful part of learning. So how do you build that into your learning? So we do it a couple ways. Like when I mentioned like discussions and the reflections, one of the things I'll do in my classes is I'll actively tell, in any activity, I'll actively tell them, this is a kind of a hard conversation to have. It's a tough conversation or a tough reflection, but it's in the mindset of we're here to improve, or we're here to change what we've done in the past. This is a safe place. Nobody's here to judge. Nobody gets it 100% perfect all the time, but we're here to kind of reflect on old things and see how we could do things better. I found that in my classes, and it's actually one of the activities I've had in the class was I asked people to think about something they did in the past that at the time felt like it was really good, and if they look back on it through the lens today, they realize, you know what, that wasn't good at all. So I built this activity into the class, and then I second guessed myself on will people be comfortable enough to share this type of activity with me? So I waffled back and forth on it, and ultimately I decided to trust the learners and let them tell me. So that was kind of a mind shift change for me, as I always advocate of trusting the learner, learner centric and learner first, but I waffled a bit on that one. Should I show that? So what I did is I included it. It actually turned out to be the most active and engaging activity of the entire class, because people are they're recognizing that it is a safe environment, but we're here to learn from each other, and we can learn from each other's experiences. So it's really cool to see my thought process on should I or should I not, and then see the people's reaction of, you know what, this is really powerful, and they enjoy learning from others. And I think I saw in the chat, if I can find it real quick.
Yeah.
It was moving too quickly for me. Oh, Jason. Hey, Jason. Jason said he's learned more from his peers and colleagues in recent years than reading or taking online courses. And certainly more practical things can be applied quickly. And that's one of the feedback items that I get routinely from my class, is the ability for that worldview to learn from others, to see those different point of views that I would otherwise not be exposed to.
Very cool.
I think I went off on a tangent there. Hopefully I answered the question. I went off on a...
Yeah, no, I love it. It was a fantastic tangent. And actually, I was just going to pick up also, because I think it points towards another great thing that came up in the chat from Valletta, talking about how mindsets won't change unless there's really great role modeling. And what I would point towards is how you role modeled, kind of taking a risk and sort of publicly shifting your mindset, in terms of how you're actually, running the class, and what you were willing to risk doing, and that the response you were met in that role modeling, like you were met in the risk that you took. And I think that kind of may take us towards another question, which is really like, how are our mindsets about training in and of itself maybe getting in the way of our ability to really be as effective as we possibly could be at changing mindsets using this kind of collaborative online tool?
I love that question, and that's a big focus in the. I run a course quarterly about designing for collaboration, and it's kind of one of the focus areas we have about how are we getting in our own way. And one of the things that I see frequently is that we have not all of us, but there is a mindset that learning at work is different than learning at home. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how it came about, but that's the way that we learn when we go home is almost nothing like what corporate learning is when we get to work. So, when we go home and we have, I don't know, I'll just use an example. It's the washing machine breaks. We have so many different avenues that we can go to get information about how to fix the washing machine. We have YouTube videos that we don't have to watch from beginning to end. We can skip to just the parts that we need. We have, there's repair forums. There's, you talk to your friends that their washing machine just broke last month. Here's what I did. We have all these avenues that we have when we go home, but when we come to work, we're often funneled down into a 30-minute e-learning package that I'll set through and I'll click through. And, we treat it as a one and done. I took the class, I learned, and that's not the way that people learn. So I think shifting from this mindset that learning at work should be different than learning at home, it should be the same. We learn the same regardless. Another big one that I see is that change takes time. Mm-hmm. And so when I mentioned that e-learning mindset of kind of this one and done training where you set through it, you take it, you complete it. Oh, you've learned magic. It doesn't happen like that. And especially when you're talking about things like a mindset shift, it takes time. So it takes time to practice, to enact that meaningful change. So we need to allow for that space in our design to give people time and space to practice. Mm-hmm. And I think the last one is stakeholders need to understand that real change doesn't happen doesn't come from any one and done training. It takes effort. It takes effort on the part of the business and being patient. It takes effort on the part of the learner to actually, take these new skill sets, these new mindsets, and actually apply them and grow with them. So the business needs to allow time for that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's certainly something that we run into quite a bit, is that the pressure within the business environment to have things happen fast, or to, like the whole one and done mentality can actually really constrain the amount of time and effort that people are willing to put into an online class. But, I think as we've pointed out, when it comes to shifting a mindset, it is a process that, evolves over time. It evolves through a series of experiences. And this confluence of this sort of expectation that things are going to happen quickly and, one and done versus what it actually takes is, I think, where we lose a lot of people.
Yep, absolutely.
So I don't know if you have seen any of the organizations that you have worked with be able to address that in a way to kind of shift the overall mindset, not only of the learners, but of the people who are supporting them, to kind of create more space for these things to happen.
The good thing is I see it less and less now.
Okay.
I've been with Intrepid for 5 years now, and 5 years doesn't seem like a long time, but when you're talking about changing a mindset in learning, it's gradual. So I work with all kinds of clients from all over the country and the world, and I used to spend more time helping them understand the difference of allowing for time, giving learners space. I don't feel like I see it as much anymore. So I think that's a good sign that people are understanding that real change takes time. It takes the right, it's not just about delivering content. There are other components that need to be included in whatever that learning journey looks like. There are other components that need to be included in there to make it effective. One of the things that we follow at Intrepid it's called an AGES model, AGES, which is basically grabbing attention, letting people generate their own insights, connecting on some sort of emotional level, and then allowing for spacing. And when you start to include all of that or factor in all of those with your design, you start to kind of open up the possibilities, and you start to allow for things like discussions, reflections, practice activities, because you're not constrained to that 30-minute bucket anymore.
Nice. Maybe that's a great place to actually go out to our audience and ask what, this kind of design that J.R. has just described. Have you seen examples of it in the work that you've done? Or I'd love also, J.R., to hear examples from you. And I would be okay if anyone's got one they want to share. If you want to just come off mute and just share with us something that you have seen that reflects this kind of AGES design. Anybody got one? If not, I'll ask J.R. to give us something more specific.
Put you on the spot, but I think Shelly had a comment earlier where she built something online, and I was wondering if she might want to share more about that, if that applies here or not.
That'd be great.
Are you talking about the fishbowl comment that I made?
Yeah.
I actually didn't design it, but I participated. This was through the Pacific Northwest OD network here in Seattle. And it was for like coaches and consultants. And it was a pivotal experience for me to go through it. And I've been in this field for 30 something years, and you think about being this age and having a mindset shift. I'm like, it was powerful. So they used a fishbowl approach where it was very much about focusing on presence, like how you're feeling, what you're wanting, thinking, feeling in the moment, building a lot of self-awareness, and then having that conversation. And then outside the fishbowl are the same number of people as in. So like say you have 6 people inside the fishbowl, you have 6 people outside, each person is assigned to watch someone and to try to guess at what they might be experiencing, and then they'll pause and break out into little dyads so you get to talk to the person. And it was an incredible self-awareness building exercise, just to, you know, realize how you come across, to get in touch with what you're thinking and feeling. And I think some of that's really foundational to just even exploring your own mindset. You know, before you can change the landscape of your mindset, you kind of have to, you know, walk the territory a little bit. I wish I could take credit for designing it. I think a man named Robert Crosby might have been, who's in his 90s, might have been foundational, and maybe other people have done fishbowls. I've done a couple of other types of fishbowl things for like building consensus and that sort of thing. Does that help?
It sounds like that was actually a live example. Is that correct? Not a
It
online.
was. We started online in October of 2019. Sorry, we started in person in October of 2019, and then there was the pandemic, and so we either had to cancel the remaining weeks of the workshop or go online. And we actually were able to successfully go online, create this in Zoom by having the people outside the fishbowl turn off their cameras, and the people inside the fishbowl stay on camera. And it was interjected with various different trainings, and it was over several weeks. So we did a second session with a completely new group of people. Probably, I think they've done 3 or 4 since then, maybe 5 online. So it translates to Zoom.
To Zoom, cool.
Yeah, it was remarkable.
Yeah, thank you. So J.R., any others who have used this kind of approach, any other examples of things where you've really been able to kind of capture that sort of longer, more reflective, more intensive learning process? In fact, yeah, I don't, maybe actually I can even just share one. So we do coaching in the moment is the main piece that we have on the Intrepid Learning platform. And one of the things that we do, simple as it might sound, is we actually have people do a case study on the way in. So we're having people learn in the moment coaching skills. And the very first thing they do when they get on is actually identify a situation where they want to offer coaching to somebody else. And so that's the first deal. Can they identify, you know, opportunities for coaching in the world around them? And then every, you know, week we learn new skills, and they have to apply it to their case study. But everyone can read everybody's case study, you know, on Intrepid. One of the wonderful things that, you know, really creates a learning community. And pretty soon you see that actually people are following each other's case studies because they're curious about what is going on. But what's really cool is, you know, as a moderator, so if I'm following them along, I can see whether they're getting the concepts or not. And I'm able to interact with them and, you know, maybe like, what about this? What about that? Ask them questions that get them to kind of go more deeply into the content and apply it to something that's real to them. And what is totally amazing to me about this, you know, from a design perspective, is the learning is happening over 6 weeks. So every week we're adding something to it. It's super practical because at the end, they're going to actually have an outline for a conversation that they can literally go and have with a real life person that's going to be impactful. And every single learner can be met exactly where they are. So I have, you know, some learners that are maybe not understanding kind of what the concept is in the beginning, when I have other people that are doing amazing work, and I can push the edge for both of them privately, but in a really different way. And I would just attest how incredibly powerful this is by one of my favorite examples that I give is that when we were first testing out the Intrepid platform and really kind of figuring out how this thing would work, I had one learner that got on and he truly did not understand what coaching was. Like in my first week, I was like, well, not quite that, you know, it's really not telling people what to do. You know, it's more like asking questions. And he stuck with it. And every week I was just sort of pushing the edge a little bit with him. And the last thing that this learner had to do at the end was write up a coaching conversation that was real, that he had gone off platform and had. And he came back and said, you know, I was asked by a group of people to address someone in our community that was spreading hate online. He said, you know, before I had done this course, I probably would have gone and lectured the person and told him why he was bad and wrong. But after the course, he said, I knew that wasn't going to work. So I took these skills that I learned and I got curious about why the person was choosing to do this. And I was use my skills to help that person see that if he actually stopped spreading hate, that he could actually attain the kind of connection he was looking for. And he said, and the man committed to stop. I was like, oh, and you know, like in any classroom setting I've ever been in, I would never have known that happened. I mean, even if someone had learned that, I would never have known. And so to this design that you're pointing towards, JR, it was just, to me, that's an example of how that kind of reflection and learning and questioning over time with something that's real and applicable can actually really lead to some super positive results. Is there an
awesome story?
Yeah, it blew my mind, I have to say. I guess one of the things I would point it to is one of the reasons I actually wanted to have this conversation with you is because I'd never seen that kind of learning with all the in-person stuff that we had done through all the years. And I felt like how this platform breaks the walls of the classroom is powerful if we can figure out how to really harness these things in ways that people grab onto.
And it's kind of I don't know, I always view it as it's kind of online collaborative learning. It's kind of the best of both worlds. So you have the best of the instructor-led, the in-person class, but you also have the best of the online where, you know, in a classroom setting, you may not have had the time to have these types of conversations or even to realize, you know, what they were thinking. But having these things like being able to post in the discussions and post your things that you're working on, gives you more of an insight into everybody. So that you can drill down into those. That's why I say it's an awesome story, because that's the intent, is to be able to drill down and find those things and make the real impact.
Yeah, thank you. Beth, are there any questions that have come up? This has been a super active chat. I'm sorry, I haven't been tracking every single piece of it because we've had so many people kind of adding things. So thank you for that. And hopefully you are kind of creating some insights collectively together. Beth, is there anything that you feel like we should kind of dive into a little bit more here, or questions that maybe JR could address?
We have, so I feel like if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat, just open dialogue. We don't have anything like super present in the chat right now. But I know a lot of the conversation sometimes for us is around like compliance training versus like changing a mindset. So do you guys want to talk about that a little bit more?
Compliance training. Compliance training is probably the toughest nut for people to crack in my world and what I see. And largely, I think, because a lot of times compliance training comes with legal requirements that, you know, requires either time in seat or things like that. So sometimes you have to get creative in order to meet those legal requirements, but also find a way that engages people. Because one of the things I hear frequently is that, you know, learners will just click through compliance training. It's click, click, click. How fast can I get through it so I can get my check mark and move on with my day? Yeah, and you know, I'm also guilty of it. I will do the same things. I do the same things in some of my company's compliance trainings. It's human nature, right? Because you want to click through it as fast as you can. I've got other stuff to do. This email security policy training is probably not high on my list right now, but I can tell you one of the things that my company did that I thought was really cool and caught me by surprise is that we did have, it was on email security. So we did do an email security, it's like a 15-30 minute, just standard run of the mill webinar, you know, read the thing, answer a couple quiz questions and then move on. But about a week later, after I did that, I got an email that looked fishy. It looks like spam, right? Something that, you know, I would normally say, like, yeah, this is not legit. So we have this option to flag it to IT, or I forget what it's called, but flag it to IT. So I did that. I flagged it to IT, didn't think anything about it. And the next day I got an email from IT congratulating me that on identifying that spam. So turns out they set me up. It was a setup, right? They sent me a fake fishy spam email to see if I would catch it. And I did, and they rewarded me for it. But that, if you think about it from an e-learning perspective, or from compliance training perspective, a lot of that stuff doesn't really stick with you, right? But this particular example stuck with me because they got me involved in a level that I didn't expect. It was a real world application. It was a safe environment. So if I would have flagged it otherwise, nothing would have been compromised or anything like that. But it was a real world test and got me engaged. And now I'm talking about it, a year later. So compliance training is tough because it does have those requirements, but there are fun, unique, creative ways to get people involved in things. I think it just depends on your scenario, your situation, and what you have available.
I found also sometimes if you can connect the compliance training to something that's real for people, like why it really matters that you learn these things, and I'm not exactly sure. I've seen it happen offline in a different setting, so I could imagine a different way of applying it. But the example I would give was, years ago I was doing coaching skills training and, with a construction company, and the compliance manager was there and said, this doesn't really apply to me. I just tell people what to do. I don't need to coach them. And as he went through the day, he was sort of realizing more and more that he was just telling everyone what to do. And the aha that he had was actually telling people why it mattered was probably more likely to have them actually comply with the compliance. And so he, in this case, literally went on to a site the next day. There was a crew that was out of compliance. He called the manager down and had him gather the crew. And instead of saying, you're bad, you're wrong, you need to do this, this person said, we care about all of you. You are all the breadwinners for your families. We are asking you to be safe so that you can continue to provide for them. And we are asking you to do this because it is in the best interest of you and your family and the role that you play. And he said, everyone went into compliance. And so I offer this because I think when we can touch that emotion of why it matters, I could even imagine, JR, if the compliance training opened with a little video that said, here's what happened when one person let something in, like one person at this, company didn't catch this thing. We were compromised. This is don't let that be you. Let's have some learning for the next 15 minutes. So that you're not the person we look to that says, you were the one that made us slip or something. I don't know if that would work, but I know.
Yeah, and it made me think. I mean, your example is perfect. A lot of clients will do some compliance training will focus on from the CEO view, like here's why we need to do this and important. Sometimes I found that the CEO doesn't register with people like somebody that's more closer to them, either a peer or more of a a closer manager. So sometimes when you can get personal stories about how something has affected them, why this changed the way they look at things, when you get personal stories closer to the source of of the learner, those I found create a lot more engagement and connection on kind of that emotional level than somebody that's too far removed from like a CEO level or something like that. I found that works well for clients too.
Nice. Yeah, I think wherever that emotional resonance is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so actually I'm kind of looking at the chat here and seeing that Robin has says, seems like we need to figure out how to change people's mindset about compliance training. And
I'm still struggling with that one too. I still work on that one. That's my toughest one too.
Yeah, I'm hearing, let's see, compliance training is fun or emotional and helps a learning stick. However, stakeholders sometimes want them to be serious because compliance is serious business. Conflicts with what learners want. Yeah, I think this sort of gets to interesting. I feel like if we're talking about changing mindsets, I think one of the greatest mindsets that we might need to change is our own, actually, about what learning is, about how it serves us, about all the things that are possible in terms of how we inspire people to choose to change, by the way, at scale now. If you think about these mindset changes, this is just not about getting one or two people to change their mind. We increasingly need hundreds, thousands of people to change their mind. So let me just kind of maybe as a final kind of thought, JR, any thoughts on like where if you could challenge people to think about these things a little bit differently? Are there any nuggets that you might drop in there to help them change their mindset about learning in and of itself?
I think the biggest thing that I will always advocate for in probably any learning situation is to include your learners. Make your learners a part of the learning journey, whatever it is. The best way to keep engagement, to get engagement and to keep engagement is to let your learners be a part of the journey. So let them share their stories, let them share their experiences, let them share their ideas. And we've already talked about how that can, affect others. You may connect with someone on a different level than what the content did. But more than that is people don't generally come to your training, your learning. They don't come to you as a blank slate, and you lose them if you treat them as such. So give them space to tell you, how smart they are. Give them space to tell you about the smart things that they're already doing that might connect with someone that others don't. And I think we've already talked about, allow for practice, and I call fail safes, but I use the word fail safe in a different way. So, give people a chance to practice in their environment, but safely. Let them fail. I always think back to in college when professor asked a question, and I was so confident in my answer that I stuck my hand up. I answered the question. I was dead wrong. Those really stings, but it's impactful because you learn from those moments. So, but you have to give people a space to learn from that in a safe environment, so that they feel safe to continue practicing, continue evolving, and continue to apply it. It's hard to apply it if you don't feel safe when doing it.
Yeah, fascinating. The aha for me, or just the thought for me, is like maybe that's actually the first mindset change we need. Is actually like to change the mindset of people so that they are much more open to understanding how human brains actually learn and can be more supportive of it, because it seems like our old mindset about learning and our new approaches are just not, sometimes they hit but when they don't, I think we lose some of the capability that's here. So, well, let me just open up for any last questions that we might have for JR. I think this has been a wonderful conversation, but is there anything that anyone is still sitting with that you'd like to know a little bit more about or have a share about before we wrap things up? We got something from David, right? So what are additional tips for getting learners to buy into the idea of learning journeys instead of attending an event and checking it off as done on a development plan? Oh, great question. Thanks. What do you think, JR?
Getting learners to buy into it. So the idea of like this spaced learning, right? I think is what the question is asking. So not a one and done. So I think there's got to be a few things in place. One, it's got to be relevant. We have work commitments. We have our calendars are already, they're already full. So whatever I'm, taking part in, it needs to be relevant to me. So don't waste their learners' time. Make it as relevant as possible. If possible, schedule space for them in their calendar. So what a lot of clients will do is, if there's going to be, if you're going to have an hour a week to spend in this class. So let's say 6-week class, and the goal is to spend an hour a week. If it's possible, in advance, send them out a calendar invite that automatically blocks off that calendar. That works really well for a lot of clients, rather than letting learners get to week 2 and their calendar is already full and they're having a struggle finding that time. If you can schedule in advance, that's awesome for them. Also schedule it around, be aware of any challenges that may have in the schedule. A lot of clients, I've had clients before that have scheduled learning during a big company. I forget what it was, but basically a company situation going on where it's kind of an all hands on deck. They failed to account for that. So, the work is going to take priority in that case. So shifting out your time frame, being aware of what those challenges are, and then make it available in smaller chunks of time. So I don't, you may block out an hour for me. I may not have an hour to sit, but if I can do chunks of it, so if you can give me like, in Intrepid, we organize it in a way that you may have, 5 to 10 minutes of content. You can leave, you can come back and do another section of 5 to 10 10-minute content. Take that hour a week, divide it up however you want, but however you need, but just allow learners the space for that. There's a few things off the top of my head that I think I've seen work well with clients.
There's a few things that we do too that I think really make a difference. So one of them is we will usually get our cohorts together like in person, like on a Zoom call before they get online. And we talk about why it matters. So we have someone in there, they're like, here's what it's going to be like. We give them a quick tour so it's not intimidating. And we say, hey, you got to schedule time. Like time's not going to happen, like to JR's point. And so we give them a heads up, like you got to find this time or it's not going to work. Other things that we have done is had interspersed in the journey times where the cohort gets back together offline and actually does some practice of what they've learned online. And so I think they feel like they're traveling as a cohort. And so they're sort of moving together as a cohort. Other things, we also train champions for our work. So these are people who can just be anybody from anywhere that learned some of these skills that actually are, their only focus is really to kind of keep the cohort going, check in with them, see how they're doing, ask if they've got questions. And so we find the more community that you build around the cohort, the more it actually literally feels like a journey because people are traveling together and have touch points where they know they're going to touch together. And so I think sometimes that can be helpful. I know it takes more effort, and we find, convincing clients to actually put all that effort into it is not always the easiest sell. But we find the more community that you build around the learning experience, I think the more people take from it. Looks like we're getting a couple other questions. We had a question about metrics from Valetta. JR, it's JR, what tangible metrics have you captured? Things that the business can say the experience was effective and worth the investment. Do you have any comments?
That is a good question. So there are traditional metrics that we're all used to. How many pieces of content they completed, those types of things. One of the things that I look for in my classes to kind of gauge effectiveness of one of the things I look for is engagement. And the way I do that is to look at my activities where the learners are actually participating. So in Intrepid, it's discussions, missions. If we're having to do projects, what I'm looking at is how many people opened the tile and actually looked at the content versus how many people actually submitted it. So I can gauge engagement a little bit that way by seeing if I can get them to open the tile, if I can just get them to look at the content, I can get them to complete it. So what I found, like in my class, for example, I generally have about a 90% engagement with the content that people open. So I look at that and see, okay, is it engaging? If I can get people to look at it and it's engaging them to complete it, I know I'm on the right track. So then I have this other piece of it where, okay, what about the people that aren't even looking? They're not looking at the content. So I have two buckets there. Now, how do I get those people that aren't looking into the class? Because I know if I get them to look at it, they're probably going to it'll probably hook them and they'll probably complete it and they can continue on with me. So there are tips and tricks that I do to get people engaged. You send them nudges. Don't assume that learning is going to be if you build it, they will come. If you build it, they will not come unless it's relevant to them, and it's giving them some sort of value. And occasionally work still gets in the way, and they still need, occasional nudges and reminders that, hey, here's what's out there. Have you seen what people have, here's an example of what people have posted this week. Here's some highlights, not just a generic email that says, hey, make sure you log in. Give them some value in those communications. I'm getting off track from the metrics part of it, but one of the non-standard metrics that I have clients focus on is, as you're going through the journey, what are you building? What are they building towards? And typically there's some sort of output by the end of like that 3 weeks, that's 6 weeks or 10 months. We have clients running the spectrum on time. But so in one of our clients' case, they build a business plan as they go through the course. I think it's 8 weeks. They build a business plan. When they're done at each week, they kind of build a little piece of it. And when they're done, they have a fully set business plan that they can then take right off into the real world and apply. I forget the numbers exactly, but from those business plans, I want to say it was like a 20% increase in sales in one example. So you start to think about not just looking at these traditional metrics, but these metrics of, what are we having people build towards? We should be able to walk away from this learning journey with something tangible that I can then go and affect and make, affect change. And that's one of the biggest pieces I feel that people miss, because we're still really focused on how much time did they spend? How many pieces did they complete? Those traditional metrics.
Yeah, agreed. I think sometimes, we have seen clients that if they have a large enough population and they're training over enough of a period of time, who watch metrics in their enterprise-wide surveys. So they actually target certain numbers that they see evolve. But what we actually found more powerful was to go and ask learners after, what are you doing differently as a result of what you learned here? What would you have done before you learned this? What did you do after you learned it? And what impact did that have? And we found that actually gathering those kinds of case studies or stories were actually in some ways the most impactful way to answer the question, are people actually doing anything differently that's making a difference? And sometimes if we just ask them directly, we got the kinds of stories that leaders were looking for to go, okay, in some cases that paid for everything. Like, one person just changing, asking the right question that resolved an issue that was happening in a call center with losing people. And just the amount of money that would be saved by increasing retention would make it more than worth the value of the investment. So, yeah.
And it's a little bit more involved to gather that. That's the perfect kind of, alternate metrics that I'm talking about. It's a little bit more involved to get that information, because you do have to go ask. It's not just they gave me an 8 on my NPS score. It's more detailed than that. So it's spending a little bit more time, a little bit more effort gathering the data, and then you can really drill down into those specific examples. What are you doing differently? How has business changed?
I think it's always a question of like, why is the question being asked, and what is it you need to actually kind of produce to address it? So.
Yeah.
Well, with that, let me say, J.R., any closing comments on our conversation today before we let folks go?
I think I've hit on all of my major themes that I like to focus on when we talk about, changing learning and mindsets. It was a really fun conversation. I appreciate you inviting me and joining in. And I also, one of the things that I saw that I thought was really cool, I didn't get a chance to read through all the chat, but I'm seeing people having their own side conversations about the topics in the chat, which is the perfect example of how this should happen. You don't have to listen to, you don't have to just listen to the video. You can be a part of it as well. So I appreciate everybody, posting your own thoughts, replying to each other, and having conversations. That's awesome. That's the way it should be.
I love it. Learning with and from each other. Woohoo. That's how it's done, right? Well, J.R., thanks so much for coming, sharing your wisdom, your insights. So valuable. Grateful. Thank you, everyone, for being part of our conversation today and being so active. Again, as J.R. points out, just connecting with each other. Such a gift. So we appreciate you being here, and we hope you'll tune in at another time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.